Governor Haley. Good visiting the other day.
It's always nice to talk to a fellow governor.
Indeed, we're part of once a governor, always a governor.
That's right. That's right.
Authoritarian nations around the world are cracking down on freedom of the press, and that is a freedom that is part of the 1947 UN Declaration of Human Rights. And even nations that are allies, for example, Turkey and Egypt, where we have significant alliances, have seen real declines in press freedom. I think recently a study came out suggesting Turkey may be the principal violator of press freedoms now in the world. What can be done through the UN to promote a free press around the world?
Well, you know, I think the United States has always promoted freedom of press, and while those of us that have been in elected office may not always like it, it is the way it's supposed to be. The press has a job to do, and we should allow them to do it. And so I think, again, that goes in with American values, that we should talk about that, and that's something that I'd be happy to express.
So you agree that efforts to restrict the press would be a clear violation of not just the UN Charter, but American values?
Absolutely.
And that would include blacklisting members of the press corps whose coverage you don't like, ridiculing individual journalists who are doing their jobs.
Are you trying to imply something?
Not about you. Or imploring voters not to trust the media. That's sort of a violation of our leadership role in trying to promote a free press. Wouldn't you agree?
We do always want to encourage free press.
Thank you. With respect to Israel-Palestine, you answered a very direct question from Senator Murphy about whether you believe the long-standing bipartisan U.S. policy with respect to the goal would be a two-state solution between the Jewish state of Israel and an Arab state of Palestine. That was the phraseology of the original 1947 U.S. resolution. To the best of your knowledge, is the Trump administration committed to maintaining that 70-year bipartisan commitment?
I have not heard anything different.
Okay. If, as U.S. Ambassador to the UN, there are actions taken by Palestine, violence, incitement, rocket attacks from Gaza, that threaten the prospects of peace, would you be firm in calling those out?
I will be firm in calling out anyone that is trying to disrupt peace around the world.
And so if it's Palestinian actions or Israeli actions that you think threaten the bipartisan commitment toward a two-state solution, you wouldn't hesitate to speak out?
I think that we will always have those conversations. What forum we have those conversations in may be different, but yes, I will always have those conversations.
Okay. This committee forwarded a resolution to the floor last week stating that the U.S. should not allow Security Council actions that would either dictate peace terms or recognize unilateral Palestinian actions, but would instead encourage the parties to find the path forward. I think it was reported out unanimously. We've all been disappointed by the lack of progress on this issue. How could you use your role as UN ambassador to help find, it may not seem like it's right around the corner, but we always have to be trying to help find a path toward that, toward achieving the goal that we've had for so very long?
You know, I think that as important as it is for the United States to see Israel as an ally, it's just as important for us to want peace in that area. And so I think it's important that we support the two coming to the table, that they continue to have those discussions, and that we encourage other Security Council members, rather than putting forth or allowing resolutions like that, to instead show their support for how they want the two to come together and have those discussions.
Senator Young asked you a question about, you were having a discussion about Syria and about why there had been insufficient action in Syria, and he pointed out that Russia had over and over again vetoed Security Council resolutions about Syria, and it wasn't really a surprise. It was probably understood that they would veto them, but there's still a value in putting a resolution on the table, even if a Security Council member is going to veto it, just to point out sort of who will stand up for principles and who won't. We've had all this report about Russian effort to influence the American election, and it's not the first time. They did it with respect to Brexit, the Brexit election. There's significant discussion about what they may be doing with respect to the French presidential elections and with elections for the German chancellor as well. Would you be willing to speak out for the integrity of nations' electoral processes and work with colleagues to present a Security Council resolution counter Russia for their activity to try to influence the elections of other nations?
Yes, Russia or any other country that tried to commit that act.
You indicated that you were an opponent of the Iran deal. Would you support the U.S. unilaterally backing out of the Iran deal at this point?
I think what would be more beneficial at this point is that we look at all the details of the Iran deal. We see if they are actually in compliance. If we find that there are violations, then we act on those violations. And I think that and watching that very closely is important. What we did was we gave the state sponsor of terrorism a pass that even after 10 years, they will not be held to any sort of prohibitions on building nuclear weapons. And, we gave them billions of dollars to do it. So I believe that if that has passed, and if that is where it is, we need to hold them accountable and watch them as we go forward.
I would encourage you to read the agreement, because what you just stated about the agreement is quite inaccurate. There are many, many restrictions in the agreement after 10 years, specific restrictions in perpetuity. The first paragraph of the agreement says that Iran, pursuant to the agreement, will never seek to develop, acquire, or otherwise construct a nuclear weapon. So the notion that there's no restrictions after 10 years, I don't know where you got that from. The notion that we gave them money, we didn't give them anything. There was money that was Iran's that had been frozen. We released access so that they could get money that was theirs in exchange for their agreement to restrict their nuclear weapons program and guarantee in perpetuity not only to not have nuclear weapons, but allow inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency that accurately reported to this body that Iraq didn't have a nuclear weapons program, and we disbelieved them and started a war and found out that they were right. So I would encourage you to read the agreement, because if you think those things, I can see why you were against it, and I can see why you might want to back out of it. But actually, that is a completely inaccurate reflection of the agreement. I would also encourage you to speak to intelligence and military officials in Israel, many of whom now say that they think the agreement is working with respect to the nuclear aspect of Iran's activity. There's other activity that's very troubling that we obviously need to be very aggressive in countering. That's all I have. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And I would just say that while, yes, I will look into that, what we all need to remember is a nuclear Iran is very dangerous for the entire world. And it is important that we look at all the details of the agreement, which I will do, and make sure that they are actually following through on the promises that were made.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,